Christmas Eve, 1944. Deep inside the frozen Ardennes forest, American soldiers expected gunfire, not Christmas carols. But that night, against all odds, U.S. troops and German soldiers shared food, warmth, and humanity in one of the most unbelievable moments of World War II. This is the forgotten American version of the Christmas Truce, a story every American should hear. The Battle of the Bulge had just begun. Temperatures were far below freezing, and snow was falling nonstop. American troops, most of them young, exhausted, and hungry, were stuck defending a forest they barely knew. They were running low on supplies, low on hope, and many believed they wouldn't survive the winter. For these soldiers, stranded in the freezing woods of Belgium, Christmas felt like a distant, impossible dream. They were cut off from their units, surrounded by the enemy, and facing the grim reality of war. The silence of the forest was broken only by the crunch of snow under their boots and the distant, menacing rumble of artillery. Hope was a resource even more scarce than food or ammunition. But far from the main roads, nestled deep in the trees, there was a tiny cabin. Inside lived a German mother named Elizabeth Finken and her 12-year-old son, Fritz. They were simply trying to survive Christmas Eve. After their home in Aachen was destroyed by bombing, they had fled to this small hunting lodge, hoping to find safety away from the fighting. They had no idea the world was about to knock on their door, literally. As Elizabeth prepared a meager Christmas dinner, she prayed for peace and for the safety of her family. Her small world was about to collide with the massive conflict raging just outside her window. Close to midnight, a sharp knock broke the stillness of the night. 3 American soldiers, one of them badly wounded, had stumbled through the snow toward the faint light of the cabin. They were freezing, starving, and desperate for shelter. Elizabeth heard the knock. She knew opening the door to the enemy could get her executed by her own countrymen. Her heart pounded, but she opened it anyway. When she saw the U.S. uniforms, she panicked. Her son Fritz later recalled the terror in her eyes. But instead of turning them away, she looked at the injured soldier, pale and shivering, and said softly in broken English, "Come in. It's Christmas." She led them inside to the warmth of her small stove, a simple act of compassion that defied the hatred of the war. As the Americans warmed themselves, grateful for the shelter, another knock came. This time, it was German soldiers. 4 of them. Elizabeth froze. If either side saw the other inside her house, everyone could die in a hail of gunfire. Her tiny cabin would become a tomb. Her mind raced. But instead of choosing sides, instead of giving in to fear, she did something truly extraordinary. She walked outside, shut the door firmly behind her, stood in the biting snow, and faced the German soldiers. She said the craziest sentence of her life. "You may come in and have a warm meal, but there will be no shooting tonight." She told them there were other guests inside, guests they would not consider friends. She made it clear this was a night of peace in her home, or no one was welcome. The German corporal and his men hesitated. They stared at this brave woman, then at the closed cabin door. The war had taught them to trust no one. But her sincerity was undeniable. Surprisingly, they agreed. They handed over their rifles and pistols to her. Elizabeth stacked the weapons in a pile. The Americans, watching from inside, understood the gesture and agreed to do the same, placing their firearms beside the Germans. Inside that small cabin, for one night, no one was an enemy. No one was a soldier. No one was fighting for a country. They were just men, hungry, cold, and trapped in the same terrible war. The tension slowly eased, replaced by a sense of shared vulnerability and a quiet, unspoken understanding. Elizabeth got to work, preparing the best meals she could. She had a rooster she'd been saving, some potatoes, and a bit of bread. It wasn't enough for a feast, but that night it felt like a miracle. The soldiers, both American and German, helped with the table. They laughed softly, their voices low. One German soldier, a former medical student, shared a bottle of red wine he'd been carrying. Another offered a piece of chocolate from his rations. A young American GI pulled out a worn photograph of his wife and two small kids back home, showing it to the men around the table. A German soldier nodded, his eyes filled with a sad understanding, and said quietly, "Ich auch. I have children too." In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of the fire, they weren't adversaries. They were fathers, sons, and husbands, united by their shared longing for home and an end to the fighting. For the first time in months, they felt human again. One of the American soldiers was seriously injured, with a deep wound in his leg. The German soldier, who had been a medical student before the war, examined him right there on the cabin floor. Using Elizabeth's first aid kit and what little supplies he had, he cleaned the wound, applied a makeshift bandage, and likely saved the American's life from a fatal infection. He explained to the Americans, in a mix of German and English, how to care for the injury until they could find the proper doctor. This act of care transcended all battle lines. The Americans, deeply moved, wouldn't forget that moment of kindness from an enemy soldier. It was a powerful reminder that their shared humanity was stronger than their uniforms. When Christmas morning came, the warm light of dawn filtered through the cabin window, bringing with it the cold reality of the war. The soldiers knew the truce had to end. Both sides gathered their gear and prepared to leave. But before they went their separate ways, the German corporal unfolded a map. He pointed out a safe route for the Americans, a direction that would help them avoid German patrols and find their way back to their lines. He could have easily led them into an ambush, but instead he helped them live. The soldiers all shook hands. There was no anger, no war in their eyes, just mutual respect. Then they walked away in opposite directions, disappearing back into the frozen forest, back into the war. This wasn't a ceasefire planned by governments. There were no generals, no treaties, and no official orders. It was just a small group of ordinary people choosing peace, even for one single night, in the middle of humanity's deadliest conflict. It is a powerful story that reminds us that even when the world is at its absolute worst, people can still be at their best. The courage of Elizabeth Vinken and the humanity of those soldiers prove that compassion isn't a weakness, but a strength that can shine in the darkest of times. If this story hit your heart even a little, imagine how many more stories like this have been forgotten. Hit like, subscribe, and comment peace if you want more true American history stories that restore a little faith in humanity. Merry Christmas wherever you are. Thanks for watching.